Hey guys, welcome back to more English with Dry. Today we are taking a look at the importance of names in J.B. Priestley's and Inspector Ghoul's. The first thing that I'd like you to do in this lesson is to take a look at the following image. I want you to think about who this person is and whether or not you recognize them, why they are important, and finally what they represent. I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to pause the video and have a go at answering these questions. So, you probably should have been able to work out that that was, of course, an image of Eve from the biblical Garden of Eden story. She was the first woman, according to all Abrahamic religions' origin story. Now, the Abrahamic religions are, of course, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. The book of Genesis describes how she was created out of the rib of Adam, the first man, in order to be his companion. She was tempted by the serpent, which is also pictured in this image and the previous one, to eat the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge, which was a direct disobeyal of God's command. She shared this fruit with Adam, and as a result, humans were banished from the Garden of Eden forever. This is referred to this day as the fall of man. Now, this is important in that it obviously connects with Eva Smith in Inspector Ghoul's, and he has given her this name for a reason. But we are going to think about what specifically the name connotes. Again, have a few minutes, pause the video, and see if you can connect this idea of Eve from the Garden of Eden story with Eva Smith in the play. All right, so the first thing to consider is that Eve's sin is often believed to be the cause for the fall of humanity, and as a consequence, historically, women have been blamed for this transgression, and it's often used as a justification for oppressive treatment towards women. In the play, Eva certainly suffers more purely as a result of being a woman, particularly if we think about some of the things that Arthur Burling does to her, indeed the things that Gerald and Eric do, and even to a lesser extent what Sheila does and what Sybil does. All of these things you could consider as being more likely to have happened to Eva because of the fact that she is a woman. Secondly, Eve was the first woman and so therefore was representative of all womankind. Now, Eva Smith can be viewed as this as well, for reasons we'll come on to. Thirdly, in Genesis, Eve corrupted Adam, tempting him to eat the forbidden fruit. However, conversely, in this play, the idea possibly is that Eva is corrupted by the society around her. J.B. Priestley was not a religious man, and it's highly likely he was looking to subvert some of these biblical stories, perhaps because he didn't believe them, or because he wanted society to have a different view on them. Either way, he goes against the original story in the sense that Eva is this pure person who is made bad and corrupted, as we've said, by the people around her, specifically the Burlings. They're the ones who make her turn to selling herself and then ultimately to committing suicide. And finally, Eva Smith. Smith was one of the most common English last names in 1912, particularly among the working classes. Now, at the end, the inspector, of course, gives his famous Fire, Blood and Anguish speech, in which he describes millions and millions of Eva Smiths and John Smiths. Now, his purpose in this speech is to remind the Burlings and the audience that actually Eva Smith is just one person, but there are millions of people like her. And so we must consider our treatment of everyone when we watch this play and take its message on board. It's not really about this one woman, Eva Smith. So he uses this to show us that millions of people are in the same position as she was, and the audience should strive to treat all of them better. So, more names to consider. Daisy Renton. Now, this is obviously Eva Smith as well, but this is, of course, the name she selects for herself after Sheila has had her sacked from Millwards. So firstly, Daisy usually connotes freshness and conjures images of green and pleasant fields. The idiom, as fresh as a daisy, also suggests the idea not only of cleanliness, but also of rebirth. And it's fitting that he selects this name, for Eva chooses it after she is sacked from Millwards, at a point when she wants to start a new life. She wishes to leave behind the bad fortune and disappointment that was associated with her old name and her old life. However, almost as quickly as she decides to change her name to Daisy Renton, the name changes itself to being something that actually connotes negativity. The name Renton is loaded with meaning that connects to the unpleasant future ahead of her. The fact she seems to become a woman of the town, which is a euphemistic way of saying a prostitute in the play, sorry, by attending the palace bar, is implied in the verb rent appearing at the front of the surname. Moreover, Gerald and Eric both effectively rent her, as both use her in the way you might decide to borrow an object or a thing. Rent is traditionally used to describe renting a home that you don't own and living and using for the period of time you need it for, or renting a car because you don't have one or access to one. They, however, rent her almost, paying her either in money or in favors to use her in a sexual way for their own gratification. However, clearly there is a sense for both of them that when they get bored of her or they no longer need her, they get rid of her, i.e., they do not wish to be in a relationship with her or marry her, and so they send her away. And this is just like a rented commodity. So the name itself speaks to the tragedy of this woman, is that she tries to rebuild herself and start again, only to be used even more viciously and thoughtlessly, and then finally thrown away. Next, we will look at Inspector Ghoul's name. Now, the name Ghoul is most often compared to the word ghoul, a demonic spirit who's connected closely with death. Now, it does not actually hugely help us to think of the inspector in the traditional sense of a ghoul, because they were malevolent beings with evil intent, and obviously that's not what the inspector does or has in this play. He's more about inspiring the Burlings and Gerald to feel compassion and feel a greater degree of social responsibility for their actions. So perhaps it's best to simply think of him as an unknowable figure who could be many things. Yet, the name Ghoul does link to the supernatural, and that is an interesting and important way to view the inspector. He would be a manifestation of the Burlings' consciences, implying that deep down they are actually aware of what they've done, but they have repressed their sense of guilt so far that it appears in the form of a police inspector. A manifestation is a little bit like a personification. It is when something that has not got tangible or physical form appears in a physical way. So, for instance, their conscience, that could appear in a human form, and that would be a physical manifestation. Equally, given his omniscience, or rather the quality he has of seemingly knowing everything, and the manner in which he appears to transcend time, he can be considered a godlike figure who has come to pass judgment. Several religions view God's status as above or beyond or outside of time. The best way to imagine this is like watching something on Netflix or YouTube, in the sense that you can select the circle, you can drag it to any part of the episode or film you want, and you can start from there. This is a bit like how God experiences time in real life. Humans can only pass from one second to the next and only exist in the present. They cannot access the future or the past except in memory. God, however, is above this and can choose which part of time to go into, which fits in with the idea that Ghoul seems to know that Eva Smith is dead before she is. And so in that sense, the name Ghoul is fitting because it implies these qualities that he seems to have. Further, also, indeed, the all-knowing aspect in which he seems to know everything that the Burlings have done. Next, Sybil Burling. The name Sybil dates back to ancient Greece, when Sibyls were female prophets or oracles. Prophets, of course, being those who deliver the word of God or of gods, and oracles are beings who predict the future. Sibyls in ancient Greece claimed to be able to interpret the wishes of the gods. Of course, in Greek mythology, there were many different gods. Now, Priestley, as we've said, was an atheist, and so it's possible the name was deliberately given to this character, ironically. Now, irony here is when something is represented one way to convey an opposite message in such ways that it is humorous. Now, by calling Sybil, it suggests that she believes that she can see the future, just like these, oracles and prophets from ancient Greece can. But given Priestley is an atheist, the chances are that he didn't believe that they could then, and he certainly doesn't believe that Sybil can now. She is the most stereotypically upper-class character, and she steadfastly believes in the British social hierarchy. This gives her a sense that everything she says is right, and she cannot be contradicted by anyone else as she considers them beneath her. This sense of self-righteousness that she feels would have been similar to the Sibyls of antiquity, and his intention could have been, ironically, to compare the two, showing that she is just as misplaced a sense of her own views as these ancients would have done. effectively showing her ignorance and how wrong she is about her own beliefs. Gerald Croft is an interesting one. The name Gerald is of Germanic descent, and it means literally the rule of the spear. This phrase was most used in the medieval period, and it suggests a society in which the strongest are the ones in charge. This largely relates to the Darwinian theory of survival of the fittest. It's an apt way of looking at Gerald because in many ways he is the fittest or strongest in the play. However, by 1912 it was the strongest socially rather than the strongest physically who ruled. Gerald can be viewed as occupying the highest rung of the social ladder in the play. Due to Arthur's more humble beginnings and the fact Sybil's a woman, Gerald's position is the most elite. And this could be why he seems to receive the least blame for Eva's death, with even the inspector seeming to excuse him. Priestley's clear message was that men like Gerald ruled Edwardian England, not necessarily with the spear, but with the social might. Sheila Burling. The name Sheila is the Irish version of the name Cecilia, which means blind one. And now this is apt because at the beginning of the play, Sheila is extremely ignorant of the world around her. She appears unaware of reality, of Gerald's affair, and of the impact her actions have on Eva Smith. Thus, blindness could be said to be her parents' fault, as they have been completely sheltered her. They and Gerald seem to have refused to allow her to be exposed to anything they consider unpleasant. However, her eyes are completely opened by the inspector, and she becomes possibly the most enlightened character. She accepts full responsibility for her part in Eva's death, but also understands that the whole family are to blame. Equally, she shows that, actually, she was aware of more than she thought she was. She reveals she knew Eric drank too much, that Gerald was doing something illicit, and that Alderman Meggerty is a disgusting man. Finally, we look at Eric Burling. The name Eric is an Old Norse name meaning eternal ruler or forever ruler. There is also an element of irony in this name, for Eric is anything but a ruler in this play. Indeed, he's more of a disappointment, an alcoholic who spends his time pursuing, sometimes violently, women, and stealing to cover his mistakes. Arthur belittles him, constantly reminding him of his shortcomings. For example, he comments that Gerald's father is able to leave him in charge of his factory works, whereas he cannot do this with Eric as he's not reliable enough. There is further irony in that Arthur and Sybil chose this name for their son. Presumably they believed he would turn out to be a success and a ruler. However, this has probably been more of a burden on Eric and could have contributed to how he is not at ease with himself and has led to his dependence on alcohol. So, as a final task, an extended response style question that you could choose to answer. How does Priestley use names to give the audience a more detailed understanding of the characters in the play? Just so you are aware, you will never get an essay question on an Inspector Calls purely about the characters' names. However, it is an excellent way to show your understanding of the writer's methods. Priestley has chosen these names for a reason, and he includes them in order to help us as an audience understand his characters better and to get a fuller sense of his message to the audience. I hope you found this video helpful. Make sure to like and subscribe and stay tuned for more.